It was a bright morning when the city was waking up slowly. The streets were filled with the usual sounds of traffic, people talking, and shopkeepers opening their stores. Among all this movement was a young girl named Sarah. She was just like any ordinary person, someone who carried dreams in her heart and kindness in her nature. That day, she had planned to meet a friend at a nearby cafe after buying a book she had been waiting for. To her, it felt like nothing more than a normal day, yet she had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. Sarah lived with her parents in a small apartment not far from downtown. She was in her late teens, cheerful, and often described by neighbors as respectful and polite. She loved reading, and the bookstore was one of her favorite places. She usually carried a small bag with her essentials, some money, her phone, and of course, her notebook where she would write down her thoughts whenever she felt inspired. That morning, as she walked out, she noticed the sky was clear. The sunshine warmed her face, and the cool breeze made her smile. She put on her earphones and listened to her favorite playlist while walking toward the bookstore. Everything felt peaceful. She stopped by a flower stall for a moment, admiring the colors and fragrance, before continuing on her way. But while Sarah was enjoying her day, something else was happening just a few streets away. A police officer named Daniel had been patrolling the area. Daniel had been in the force for several years. He was known as strict, sometimes too quick to judge situations. That morning, a report had come through the radio about a suspect in the area. The description was vague: a young individual carrying a bag, seen moving quickly through the crowd after being linked to a theft nearby. The officer had no photograph, no proper details, just a simple description that could match many innocent people in the city. As Daniel drove his car around, he grew more alert, scanning every corner for someone who might resemble the suspect. He told himself he had to act fast. In his mind, time was important, and he did not want to lose the chance of catching the person who had caused trouble. But sometimes acting too fast without checking facts leads to mistakes. At the same time, Sarah entered the bookstore. She greeted the shopkeeper, who knew her by name because she visited often. She spent a few minutes looking around the shelves until she finally found the book she wanted. With a happy smile, she paid for it and tucked it into her bag. She left the shop and started walking toward the cafe where her friend was waiting. The streets were a little crowded, and people were busy moving in all directions. Sarah didn't notice the police car that had stopped at the corner. Daniel was sitting inside, watching people pass by. His eyes landed on Sarah. She was carrying a bag, she was moving quickly, and for a moment, in his mind, she matched the vague description he had heard earlier. He did not take time to think about who she was, where she was going, or if she could truly be guilty. Instead, he convinced himself that this was the suspect. Sarah walked with her usual calmness, humming a song under her breath, not knowing she was being watched. She stopped by a traffic signal, waiting for the light to turn green. Just then, Daniel stepped out of his car. His sudden movement caught the attention of a few passers-by, but Sarah remained unaware. The girl's day had begun like any other, yet fate was slowly guiding her into a moment that would not only change her life but would also become the talk of the entire nation. All it took was a misunderstanding, a wrong judgment, and a lack of patience from someone in power. As Sarah crossed the road, she glanced at her phone, checking for a message from her friend. She noticed nothing unusual around her. The streets felt normal, the people seemed busy, and her thoughts were filled with the excitement of sharing her new book with someone who appreciated reading as much as she did. Meanwhile, Daniel tightened his grip on his walkie-talkie. He radioed in, saying he might have found the suspect. His voice carried confidence, though deep inside, he knew he had not double-checked the details. His partner on the radio told him to proceed carefully, but Daniel was already convinced of what he believed. The crowd around Sarah kept moving. Some people entered shops, others hailed cabs, and a few kids laughed while eating ice cream. Life looked ordinary from the outside. Yet, for Sarah, the story was silently shifting. In just a few minutes, she would be caught in a storm that she neither deserved nor expected. Unaware of all this, Sarah stopped near a cafe window, looking inside to see if her friend had arrived. She adjusted the strap of her bag and smiled as she spotted an empty table waiting for them. She didn't know that Daniel had already decided his next move. His eyes never left her, and his mind was certain she was the one mentioned in the report. This first part of the story paints a picture of two lives moving in opposite directions: Sarah, living her day with innocence and joy, and Daniel, carrying suspicion and pressure. Their paths were about to cross, not because of truth but because of assumption. And when assumption meets authority without care, the result often leads to pain and consequences that last far longer than anyone can imagine. The city continued with its noise and rush. People hurried to work, taxis honked at intersections, and vendors called out to attract customers. In the middle of all this, one girl was simply trying to enjoy her day, and one officer was convinced he had found a criminal. The air carried no hint of what was coming, but destiny had already written the first chapter of an incident that would make headlines, stir debates, and involve the highest level of investigation in the country. Sarah was walking toward the cafe, her mind still on the message she had received from her friend. She was excited about meeting her and telling her all about the book she had just bought. The streets around her were bustling with people heading to work, children walking with their parents, and shopkeepers arranging displays to catch the eye of passers-by. Everything seemed ordinary, familiar, and safe. She felt a sense of comfort in the routine of her city life, completely unaware that someone had already misjudged her presence. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel had stepped closer, his heart racing faster than usual. The vague description from the report played over in his mind repeatedly. He believed he had finally spotted the person he had been searching for. Without stopping to observe carefully or consider any other possibility, he decided to approach. In his years of service, Daniel had learned to trust his instincts, but sometimes instincts could be wrong when not supported by evidence. That day, his instincts were about to make a mistake that would have far-reaching consequences. Sarah walked past a small fountain in the middle of the street, pausing for a moment to look at the way sunlight reflected on the water. The simple joy of seeing the sparkles reminded her of how much she loved the small things in life. She had always been curious about people and enjoyed observing their behaviors, but today, her attention was entirely on finding her friend and settling at their usual table. She had no idea that someone was watching her closely, reading her every movement as if it were suspicious. Daniel continued to move closer. He kept a careful distance but maintained a clear line of sight. In his mind, every small action Sarah took seemed to confirm what he already thought, that she could be the suspect. He noticed the bag she carried and the speed at which she walked. To him, it looked like someone trying to avoid attention. He didn't stop to question whether it was reasonable to assume that she was guilty. His focus was entirely on catching the person described in the radio report. As Sarah approached the cafe, she slowed down to glance at the seating area. Her friend was not there yet, so she decided to stand near the window, looking out at the street while waiting. She felt calm and unbothered, unaware that the officer had already decided to intervene. Daniel saw this pause as hesitation, another sign to support his wrong assumption. The busy city around them did not affect him, his entire attention was on the girl who had done nothing wrong. Passers-by noticed the officer moving toward the girl, some with curiosity, some with concern. A few wondered why he was walking in such a focused manner, but no one could know what he believed or what he was about to do. Sarah remained unaware, checking her phone and adjusting her bag as if it were an ordinary day. The simplicity of her actions contrasted sharply with the tension building just a few feet away. At that moment, Daniel reached a point where he felt he could no longer wait. In his mind, the opportunity to catch the suspect might slip away if he did not act immediately. He took a deep breath, preparing himself to confront what he thought was the criminal. His decision-making process, however, had skipped many important steps: observation, verification, and questioning. Instead, he relied on his assumption, a shortcut that would soon prove dangerous. Sarah noticed a little boy running past the cafe, chasing a balloon. She smiled at the sight, thinking how joyful children were and how their innocence made everything feel lighter. The moment was simple, almost serene, yet in the backdrop, Daniel approached quietly but with determination. Each step he took toward her was influenced not by fact but by belief. He told himself that he had to act, and in doing so, he failed to consider the consequences of acting without certainty. The officer's approach caught the attention of a street vendor, who paused in the middle of arranging fruit to glance at the situation. Some pedestrians also looked toward the commotion, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The city seemed to hold its breath as the girl remained unaware, happily thinking about meeting her friend and talking about the new book she had purchased. Life, in that moment, continued its ordinary rhythm for everyone else except the two people whose paths were about to intersect dramatically. Daniel finally came closer and spoke loudly, intending to stop the girl. His tone carried authority, but it was also tense and rushed. He asked her to stop, to identify herself, and to cooperate. Sarah, confused, looked up at him. She had never seen this officer before and did not understand why he was speaking to her in such a serious tone. She raised her hand slightly, a gesture of surprise rather than resistance, and asked politely if something was wrong. Her calm response contrasted sharply with the tension in the officer's mind. Daniel's focus narrowed. He saw her polite question as hesitation or even a refusal. His mind, already convinced of her guilt, interpreted everything through that lens. To him, the situation seemed urgent. In reality, Sarah was innocent and simply trying to understand why she was being stopped. Her reaction was natural, human, and entirely reasonable, yet it did not match the assumptions forming in Daniel's mind. This difference in perception would soon cause a major misunderstanding. Witnesses nearby began to take notice. Some held their phones, recording the unusual interaction. People often did this out of habit in a city where unusual events were quickly captured and shared. A few people whispered among themselves, asking what had happened and why the officer was confronting the girl. Sarah's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the seriousness of the officer's actions, highlighting the growing tension of the moment. The girl tried to explain herself. She mentioned that she was on her way to meet her friend, that she had just bought a book, and that she was not involved in anything suspicious. Her voice was steady, her words polite, and her expressions honest. Yet Daniel's focus did not allow him to hear the truth. In his mind, he had already concluded that she was guilty, and confirmation bias blinded him to her explanations. The ordinary day had now shifted into a situation fueled by assumption and misjudgment. Sarah's attempts to clarify did not deter him. He was focused on the report, the vague description, and the possibility that he could let a suspect escape if he delayed any longer. He did not realize that the stress of acting quickly had caused him to overlook the basic principles of justice: careful observation, asking questions, and verifying facts. The gap between perception and reality grew wider with every passing second. As the crowd of onlookers grew slightly, the girl remained polite and cooperative, showing no fear or aggression. She simply wanted to continue her day peacefully. The officer, however, was trapped in a mindset where hesitation was unacceptable. He was convinced that immediate action was necessary, and his decision-making process was guided entirely by that belief, rather than the reality in front of him. In that tense moment, Sarah's life, her ordinary day, and her simple plans hung in the balance. A misunderstanding had already started, one that would escalate quickly, affecting not only her but also the officer, witnesses, and even higher authorities. All of this had begun with a vague report, a hasty judgment, and the assumption that someone's appearance could define guilt. The ordinary city scene now contained a critical turning point, one that would soon have consequences far beyond the streets where it began. The tension between Sarah and Officer Daniel grew with every passing moment. Sarah had tried to explain herself calmly, but the officer's mind was clouded with assumptions. He had convinced himself that she matched the description of the person from the report, and his focus was entirely on confirming his belief rather than listening to reason. Sarah, still unaware of the full seriousness of the situation, looked around at the gathering crowd and felt a growing sense of confusion. People were stopping to watch, some whispering among themselves, while others silently held their phones, recording the scene. Sarah raised her hand slightly, a gesture of peace, and spoke clearly, "I'm just on my way to meet my friend. I've done nothing wrong. I don't understand why you are stopping me." Her voice was polite, steady, and honest, filled with the calm that came from knowing she was innocent. She tried to meet the officer's eyes, hoping that he would see the truth in her expression. Her words, however, were not what Daniel wanted to hear. His mind filtered them through the lens of suspicion, interpreting her calmness as defiance or hesitation. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes scanning the bag Sarah carried. To him, the bag seemed like it could contain stolen items, though in reality, it only held her book, notebook, and personal belongings. He felt the pressure of his duty, believing that if he delayed even a moment, the suspect might escape or cause more trouble. His sense of urgency grew stronger than his sense of fairness or careful judgment. The ordinary street, once a place of simple routines, now felt like a stage for a tense confrontation, one that had the potential to spiral out of control. Sarah noticed a few passers-by watching them and realized that something serious was happening. She felt a slight nervousness creeping in, but she did not panic. Her mind raced to find words that could make the officer understand that he had made a mistake. She tried to remain polite, her voice calm yet firm. "Sir, I promise I'm not who you're looking for. Please, check with your radio or ask someone to verify before making assumptions." She hoped that reasoning would calm the situation, but Daniel's determination only intensified. Daniel's approach became more direct. He spoke louder, repeating his instructions, but Sarah could sense the tension in his tone. His movements were quick, precise, and filled with authority, but there was no room for dialogue or careful consideration. To him, hesitation was dangerous. Every second she stood still felt like time slipping away from his control. In his mind, he was acting to prevent a crime, but in reality, he was misjudging an innocent person's actions, turning an ordinary day into an extraordinary incident. Some onlookers began to murmur among themselves. "What's going on?" one woman asked her friend. "Why is he confronting her like that?" Others whispered, observing Sarah's calm demeanor and the officer's insistence. A few people held their phones, ready to record if anything unusual occurred. Sarah, though aware of the attention, did not want to escalate the situation herself. She kept her voice steady, her expressions honest, and her movements non-threatening. Yet Daniel could not see the truth, he only saw what he expected to see. The officer's determination finally led him to act more forcefully. He reached out to stop her from moving, convinced that she might try to leave or resist. Sarah instinctively stepped back, startled by the sudden action, her eyes wide with confusion. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said, her voice rising slightly but still calm. She looked around at the people who were watching and felt a mix of embarrassment and fear. She did not understand why this was happening, but she knew she had to stay composed to avoid making things worse. Daniel's perception of the situation became even more rigid. He interpreted her movement as an attempt to evade him. In his mind, the risk of letting a potential suspect get away outweighed the need to listen to explanations. He was convinced that immediate action was necessary. The scene, once ordinary and peaceful, now held the tension of a misjudged confrontation, with the crowd growing silently around them, sensing the unfolding drama. Sarah noticed a small child nearby looking curiously at the scene, and she realized how chaotic and unusual this encounter had become. She wanted to explain herself further, hoping that words could bridge the gap between her reality and Daniel's assumptions. She spoke again, calmly, "Please, check your information. I am not the person you're looking for. I am just a student heading to meet a friend." Her tone was polite, yet firm, emphasizing her innocence and desire to resolve the misunderstanding peacefully. Daniel, however, was not convinced. His focus was narrow, his attention fully absorbed by what he believed to be the suspect in front of him. The simple truth of the girl's innocence was invisible to him because his mind had already made a conclusion. Confirmation bias, the tendency to see what we expect rather than what is true, had taken over. Every word Sarah spoke, every action she made, seemed to Daniel like proof that she was hiding something or resisting authority. Meanwhile, the growing crowd began to notice the tension and whisper to each other. Some people expressed concern for Sarah, questioning why a young girl was being confronted so aggressively. Others debated whether the officer was justified. Sarah remained calm despite the situation, her thoughts focused on how to resolve it without conflict. She understood that reacting with anger or fear could worsen the misunderstanding. Her composure highlighted her innocence, yet it could not pierce the officer's clouded judgment. As Daniel reached closer, he made the decision to physically intervene to stop her from moving. His actions, driven by assumption rather than certainty, set off a moment of shock among onlookers. Some people gasped quietly, while others instinctively lifted their phones to record. Sarah, startled, stepped back instinctively, confused and frightened. Her eyes searched the crowd, hoping someone would step in to clarify the misunderstanding, but no one did immediately. The ordinary street had transformed into a tense stage of misperception and fear. Sarah tried again to explain herself. "Please, sir, I am not who you think I am. You can check the description. I have done nothing wrong." Her voice was steady, filled with honesty. She raised her hand slightly to show she meant no harm. Her actions were careful, measured, and cooperative, yet Daniel's mind was locked on the belief that he had identified the suspect. He did not hear the words clearly, he only saw movements that he misinterpreted as defiance. The scene became a mixture of confusion, tension, and growing concern. The officer's decision-making, based entirely on assumption, had created a situation where fear and misunderstanding ruled. Sarah's calm and respectful attempts to explain herself highlighted the contrast between innocence and assumption. The ordinary street, once a place of simple routines and friendly interactions, now contained a critical event shaped entirely by misjudgment. Sarah's heart beat faster as she realized how serious the situation had become. She wanted to remain calm, to cooperate fully, and to avoid escalating the misunderstanding. Every word she spoke was chosen carefully, every gesture controlled, in an effort to communicate her innocence. Yet, the officer's perception, clouded by urgency and assumption, did not allow him to see the truth. The ordinary day that began with simple plans and quiet joy was now turning into a life-changing incident. In that moment, Sarah understood the power of assumptions and authority. She knew that one person's judgment, when unchecked, could dramatically alter someone's day, reputation, and peace of mind. Her thoughts raced as she considered how to remain safe and cooperative, all while hoping that reason and verification would intervene before the misunderstanding escalated further. The ordinary city scene now carried a story of misjudgment, tension, and the fragile nature of trust between civilians and authority. The ordinary day had now shifted into something far more serious. The streets, once filled with casual chatter and laughter, had become tense as the crowd around Sarah and Officer Daniel continued to grow. People were whispering, some holding phones in their hands, ready to capture what was happening. Sarah's heart beat quickly, not from anger, but from the confusion and shock of being confronted when she had done nothing wrong. She remained calm, trying her best to communicate her innocence, but every attempt seemed to fall on ears clouded by assumption. "Daniel, 2. Felt the tension building. His mind was racing, but in a way that made him feel justified in his actions. He had convinced himself that he was doing the right thing, protecting the public from a potential criminal. The urgency of his duty had blinded him to the reality of the situation. Around him, the growing crowd began to notice the tension and the misunderstanding. Some people whispered, questioning why the officer seemed so certain, while others quietly took videos, sensing that the event might become something more significant. As the video recordings spread through the phones of bystanders, the incident quickly became the topic of conversation on social media. What had started as a small misunderstanding on a city street now had the potential to attract attention far beyond the immediate area. People shared the videos online, expressing shock and concern. Many wondered how a young girl, simply walking to meet a friend, could be treated so aggressively. Public interest grew rapidly, and soon, news outlets picked up on the story, giving it wider coverage. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the attention but remained composed. She understood that staying calm was the only way to ensure the situation did not escalate further. Her focus was on explaining her innocence, using her words and gestures to show she meant no harm. She spoke politely to the officer, repeating that she had done nothing wrong and asking for verification from the radio or any official source. Her voice, steady and clear, carried a sense of reason and truth, yet Daniel's focus was still narrow, driven by the assumption that she was the suspect. As the story gained momentum, local authorities began to take notice. The police department received reports of the incident circulating online, prompting internal discussions about the officer's actions. Concerns arose about the manner in which the situation had been handled and the importance of following proper procedures before taking physical action. The growing public attention highlighted the need for accountability, and it became clear that this was not a simple street misunderstanding but a potential case of misjudgment with serious consequences. The FBI, upon learning about the incident, decided to step in. Their involvement was not about punishment at first but about ensuring that citizens' rights were protected and that proper procedures were followed. The fact that a young girl had been confronted in such a public manner, and the situation had escalated so quickly, was deeply concerning. Investigators began reviewing the videos, eyewitness accounts, and official reports. They aimed to understand exactly what had happened, why it had happened, and how similar incidents could be prevented in the future. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to process the unfolding events. She had never imagined that a simple day out to buy a book and meet a friend could turn into a situation drawing the attention of national authorities. Despite her surprise and growing anxiety, she remained cooperative and respectful, answering questions from bystanders who approached gently and trying to maintain her dignity in front of the cameras. Her calm and composed behavior contrasted sharply with the chaos around her and highlighted the innocence that had been misjudged. The officer, now aware that the situation had attracted public attention, felt a mix of pressure and defensiveness. He knew that the recordings and the growing discussion could impact his career and reputation. This awareness added another layer of complexity to the situation, as he tried to justify his actions in the moment while still believing he was performing his duty. His internal conflict reflected the broader challenge of balancing authority with careful observation and fair judgment. Community members and activists soon joined the conversation. Local leaders and civil rights advocates emphasized the importance of verifying facts before acting, especially when dealing with individuals in public spaces. They pointed out that assumptions based on appearance or vague descriptions could easily lead to misunderstandings, unfair treatment, or even harm. Their voices amplified the conversation and encouraged careful reflection on procedures, training, and accountability within the police department. For Sarah, the incident became more than just a personal experience, it turned into a story that resonated with many people. She realized that her calm and polite responses had drawn attention to the need for fairness and respect in all interactions between citizens and law enforcement. Her situation served as a reminder that misunderstandings could escalate quickly when assumptions take the place of careful observation and communication. Despite the fear and embarrassment she had felt, she understood the importance of her role in highlighting the value of truth and patience. As the investigation continued, the officer faced scrutiny from multiple levels. Internal reviews questioned his decision-making process, the steps he had taken, and whether he had followed proper protocols. Discussions emphasized the importance of training, communication, and patience in ensuring that incidents like this were handled appropriately. The growing attention from the FBI added weight to the matter, signaling that public trust and adherence to the law were paramount concerns. In the midst of all this, Sarah's family became aware of what had happened. They were shocked and worried but also proud of her composure. They supported her in providing statements and sharing her side of the story with authorities and investigators. Her family emphasized her peaceful nature, her ordinary plans for the day, and her complete innocence. Their support helped Sarah maintain her strength and continue to navigate the situation with courage and dignity. By the end of the day, the incident had transformed from a local misunderstanding into a national conversation about justice, fairness, and accountability. Sarah, once an ordinary young girl walking through the streets of her city, had become a symbol of the importance of careful judgment and the dangers of acting on assumptions. The public attention, while overwhelming, underscored a critical lesson, that mistakes, even unintentional ones, can have far-reaching consequences, and that fairness and verification must always come first. Through the unfolding events, the story emphasized the balance between authority and responsibility. While law enforcement officers play a vital role in protecting communities, the incident illustrated how quickly a situation could escalate if caution and verification were neglected. The involvement of the FBI highlighted the seriousness of the case and reinforced the idea that every citizen, regardless of age or background, deserves respect and fair treatment. Sarah's composure, patience, and polite communication during the incident served as a model for others. Her ability to remain calm in the face of misunderstanding demonstrated strength, courage, and resilience. She showed that even when caught in a challenging and confusing situation, maintaining dignity and honesty could help navigate the complexities of human interactions and societal systems. By the time the day ended, investigators had gathered substantial evidence, including eyewitness accounts, video recordings, and statements from the involved officer. The reviews highlighted both the mistakes made and the potential for improvement in training, procedures, and communication. Sarah, though shaken by the experience, knew that her actions had contributed to a larger conversation about fairness, rights, and justice. Her ordinary day had transformed into an extraordinary lesson for her community and her city. By the next morning, the city was still buzzing with the news of the incident involving Sarah and Officer Daniel. The story had traveled quickly across social media, local news, and even national channels. People were talking not just about what had happened but also about the larger lessons it revealed about fairness, patience, and the responsibility that comes with authority. For Sarah, the day had begun as any ordinary day might, but it had ended with her story reaching thousands of people who were now aware of her experience. She had not planned for this attention, yet she understood that the outcome depended on how she handled herself with calmness and honesty. Her family was beside her, offering comfort, encouragement, and a listening ear. They reminded her of how strong she had been, how she had remained composed when confronted with confusion and fear. The support from her loved ones helped her feel safe and valued. She realized that in times of misunderstanding, having people who believe in your truth could make all the difference. She also understood that the incident had become bigger than just her personal experience. It had become a lesson for the community, the authorities, and anyone who might hear her story. The police department had begun an internal review immediately. Officers from higher ranks examined Daniel's actions carefully. They reviewed the video footage from multiple angles, interviewed witnesses, and considered the statements Sarah had provided. The investigation focused on whether proper procedures had been followed, whether the officer had used appropriate judgment, and how such situations could be prevented in the future. The department recognized that mistakes had been made, not necessarily from malice, but from misjudgment and acting too quickly without verification. Meanwhile, the FBI had officially stepped in to ensure that Sarah's rights were protected. Their involvement underscored the seriousness of the situation. Agents interviewed Sarah in a safe and supportive environment, asking her to explain the events from her perspective. They also met with the officer to understand his reasoning, motivations, and thought process. The goal of the investigation was clear: to uncover the truth, ensure accountability, and prevent similar incidents in the future. For Sarah, participating in this process was emotional but also empowering, as it allowed her voice to be heard and her side of the story to be fully represented. Public attention remained intense. Community members, activists, and media outlets continued to follow the story closely. Many people expressed concern about the dangers of acting on assumptions, particularly when authority and power are involved. The incident sparked conversations about training, communication, and the importance of careful observation before making any judgment about a person's actions. Sarah's composure and honesty became widely recognized, and many people admired the way she had handled a situation that could have easily led to anger or panic. As the investigation continued, the department took steps to address the mistakes. Officer Daniel was temporarily suspended while the review proceeded. He was required to attend additional training focused on de-escalation, careful observation, and communication. He expressed regret for misjudging the situation and for causing distress to an innocent citizen. Although his intentions had been to perform his duty, the outcome had demonstrated the importance of balancing authority with patience and verification. This reflection and corrective action were essential not only for the officer but for the community's trust in law enforcement. Sarah, in the meantime, received support from her friends, neighbors, and extended family. Her experience became a platform for dialogue about fairness, civic responsibility, and how citizens and authorities can interact more effectively. She participated in community discussions, sharing her experience and offering insights into how misunderstandings can be avoided. Her voice carried a calm wisdom, and people were inspired by her resilience and thoughtful perspective. For Sarah, what had started as an ordinary day had transformed into an opportunity to influence positive change. The media continued to cover the outcome of the investigation. Reports highlighted the steps taken to ensure accountability, the corrective measures implemented, and the lessons learned. Experts in law enforcement and civil rights weighed in, emphasizing that even well-intentioned actions must be guided by careful observation, verification, and respect for individual rights. Sarah's story served as a reminder that ordinary people could face extraordinary situations, and that fairness and calm communication were essential tools in navigating those moments. Eventually, the results of the investigation were shared publicly. It was confirmed that Sarah had been entirely innocent and that the officer had acted based on a mistaken assumption. The police department acknowledged the error and committed to stronger training programs and clearer guidelines for handling similar situations in the future. The officer accepted responsibility for the misjudgment, apologized to Sarah personally, and engaged in reflection and education to ensure that such incidents would not happen again. For Sarah, this acknowledgement was both validating and healing. It showed that her patience and composure had not only helped her navigate a difficult situation but had also contributed to meaningful change. In the weeks that followed, Sarah returned to her normal routines, carrying with her the lessons learned from this extraordinary experience. She continued to enjoy her walks, books, and time with friends, but with a new awareness of how fragile assumptions could be and how important it was to communicate clearly, even in confusing situations. The city streets, once a place of sudden confrontation, became a symbol of resilience and the power of honesty. Sarah's experience had taught her that staying calm and composed, even when faced with misunderstanding, could make a significant difference. Her story also inspired conversations in schools, community centers, and local organizations about responsibility, fairness, and empathy. People discussed how important it was to treat every individual with respect and to verify facts before acting. Sarah became a quiet role model for young people, showing that courage and integrity were not always about grand gestures but could also be about remaining truthful, calm, and respectful in challenging moments. The incident, though initially frightening and confusing for Sarah, ultimately led to positive change. Law enforcement agencies reviewed their protocols, training programs were strengthened, and the importance of patience and verification was emphasized. Sarah's experience became a case study in how assumptions, if unchecked, could lead to unnecessary conflict, and how calmness and honesty could help navigate even the most difficult situations. Her ordinary day, which had been unexpectedly disrupted, ended up leaving a lasting impact on her community and beyond. By the end of the story, Sarah had not only reclaimed her ordinary life but had also grown stronger and wiser. The event had challenged her in ways she never anticipated, yet she had faced it with grace and integrity. Her story reminded everyone that mistakes could happen, even with the best intentions, and that accountability, reflection, and learning were the keys to ensuring justice and fairness. The community, the authorities, and the wider public had all learned valuable lessons, and Sarah's courage and composure became a source of inspiration for many. In the quiet moments after the events, Sarah reflected on the experience. She realized that even in a world full of misunderstandings and assumptions, individuals could make a difference by remaining calm, honest, and respectful. She had faced fear, confusion, and public attention, yet she had emerged stronger and more aware of the importance of fairness and responsibility. The ordinary girl who had walked down the street to meet a friend had, through patience and integrity, turned a difficult moment into a story of learning, accountability, and positive change for everyone involved.